This happened on Christmas Eve of 2012. I was driving home in my truck to pick up my son in our small town in Kentucky. There is a small park parallel to the road I was on, and another road coming in at a T to that and ending at the park. I see a figure coming down the middle of the street to my left that is going to intersect the road I'm on. I'm going slow since this is in town, and the speed limit is 25, and it's Christmas Eve, so the street is empty. The figure is going to be right where I am in my truck, so I think they will stop. It is this tall figure in black, with what looks like a duster coat and a turban of all things on its head. Just as I get close, and it does not stop, just keeps going in a straight line. I see it really has no face. Just a kind of black void where the face would be, one of the blackest things I've ever seen. This thing is tall too, taller than my truck. It just keeps moving. I should have hit it, but it seemed to pass right through the truck behind me, and I stopped and watched it just continue through the park, still in a straight line, and sort of gliding because the coat and the bottom of the legs kind of faded into the ground. You really couldn't see feet or legs, just a black shadow. Don't know what this was. I have never forgotten it or gotten over it. Always feels like something I wasn't supposed to see. I was about 16. It was Christmas Eve, and it was snowing heavily. My parents and myself were sitting in the living room with the Christmas tree lights on, having eggnog and opening up my stocking gifts, as was our tradition. We suddenly heard the door knocker banging really loudly 3 times. We see no one out the window, but my dad opened up the door and looked down. There was a bloody black cat lying across the threshold across the snow. What was messed up was there were no human footprints in the snow, no tire tracks, and logistically there was nowhere, and no way that we would have not seen anyone if they put the cat there. It was still alive, so we shut the door and left it there, and it was gone in the morning. Not. My family and myself are huge animal lovers. Of course we took it in and made it comfortable. It was a young male that was not fixed and had been in a terrible fight. A few days later, we took it to a vet, and he recovered nicely. The weird thing is, aside from the knocking and no footprints in the snow, was that my mom gave it to a friend of ours that lived down the street. About 4 or 5 months later, the cat, now happily part of the family, woke them all up by howling and screaming, just freaking out. Turns out an electrical fire had started in the garage, and one of the cars was also on fire. They all woke up. Everyone was okay, and the car didn't blow up, and only the garage was damaged. But they were very lucky in general, but especially because there was all kinds of flammable stuff in the garage. Initially, they called him something stupid like Shadow, but then they renamed him Clark after Superman. He was a really nice cat and lived to be pretty old. First Christmas after my grandpa died. I was 17 and still very confused on how to handle the massive show of emotions I was having. Christmas morning, I was sitting on the floor with my brother opening presents when we noticed 2 cards tucked in the tree. I opened the one with my name on it, and it was in my grandpa's handwriting. All it said was, "Love you, Peanut," which was his nickname for me. He passed away in August and had never given me a card for Christmas in my life. My mom refuses to acknowledge this happened, but my brother remembers it as well. Up until about 9 years ago, there was a picture of me holding the card, but when I finally dealt with the grief I shoved down, the picture vanished. During the 1980s, our family had a Christmas party which ended late in the wee hours of the morning. My mom and her cousin were taking the trash outside before they went to sleep and saw that their neighbor across the house was sitting by the gutters and smiling at them. She waved hi, and the girl smiled and waved back. Then her cousin shook her and said, "That's not neighbor's name." She then realized that their neighbor had shoulder-length hair, and this girl in front of them has long ankle-length hair and is wearing a long white sleeping gown. They both started screaming and ran back inside the house. The next morning, they learned that their neighbors were not home, spending Christmas in the province. Not sure if it was really a ghost, but here in the Philippines, It would be so uncomfortable wearing a long sleeping gown since we're in a tropical country. I remember one Christmas Eve night when I was 8 or 9, me and my family went to bed after meeting with relatives. I was laying in bed just anxious for the next morning to be able to sleep. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but couldn't. This wasn't unusual for me, as I normally couldn't sleep well as a kid. Still have some sleeping problems today, so I just laid there until I get tired or the sun comes up. Well, after a while, a loud scraping sound came from my roof. It sounded like someone dragging a long piece of something hard all the way across from one side of the house to the other. I woke up and went to tell my parents. When I went in their room, they both got up because I was loud because I was scared. They said they didn't hear anything and told me to go to bed. The next day, there was debris from the roof in our yard. Still to this day, we'll never know what went across our roof. I'm from a small town known as Beataville. Blink and you'll miss it. Everyone here has some kind of ghost story, and I do mean everyone. The ones that always stuck with me, though, were my dad's stories. He was always out in the backwoods. My family resides pretty much in the middle of nowhere, so the woods were their only entertainment. There's a place known as the Old Grade. It's a notorious ghost sighting spot for my family now, but back then it was just a hunting spot for them. That's where they encountered the white thing. No one has a clue what it is. It's just this white creature with big black eyes about the size of a grown man's fist. My dad's first encounter was when he was about 16. He and his younger brother had gone out hunting in the Old Grade. They had been walking for a couple hours, and dusk had taken over the woods. They saw something walking on 4 legs. It had a snout and looked to my uncle like a fox or coyote from a distance. He started calling to bring it closer, and that's when it stood up. It stood up on its 2 legs and just stared. My dad threw a gun on it, and it hid behind a tree. I don't really have a visual to describe why this was weird, but just imagine something that's 4 feet wide hiding behind a 2-foot wide tree. It makes absolutely no sense. The chattering noise it was making is indescribable. It gives my dad chills talking about it to this day. They started backing out of the woods and stayed in the light. It wouldn't get closer if they were in the light. They made it home and tried to tell my grandma what they had seen, but she just brushed it off. But my dad and uncle knew that they saw something. You can just read the dread and fear all over them when they talk about it. It's always been the one that stuck with me. I don't go in these woods once it gets dark. I don't even really go in the day. I feel like whatever is haunting the woods here just doesn't want us there, and I'm happy to oblige. This is a story that took place back when I was a kid. I was probably somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10. At that age, I loved Christmas mainly because of all the things that I would get. I lived with my parents, brother, and sister in a 2-story home in a typical neighborhood. Each year, we would do lots of decorating inside and outside of the house. Our Christmas tree would go in the corner of our living room, and all the presents would go underneath it. On Christmas Eve that year, we went to my grandparents' house, and then we were going to my uncle's on Christmas. That night on Christmas Eve, after we all went to bed, I had a difficult time falling asleep. I usually did when I was a kid because I was always so excited for Christmas. I finally was able to doze off for a bit, but woke up sometime later when it was still the night. I remember just turning over to try to go back to sleep, but then I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My bedroom was the closest to the stairs, and even I could barely hear it. I looked at the clock, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know why anybody would be up at this hour. Being that young and a curious kid, I decided to go and look. I left my bedroom, and then walked a few feet to the railing of the stairs that overlooked the living room. I looked down, and everything seemed normal. All of the lights were off, but the lights from the Christmas tree and the few other decorations were on so I could see a little bit. I looked down at the tree for a little while longer. It was very large, and we always got the biggest tree that we could find. But then I saw somebody come out from behind the tree. None of us had heard it break, so the guy must have quietly done it somehow. It was a living room window that was broken, and I think that I saw him not long after he got in the house because nothing was even stolen. I think that he either saw me or heard me, and that scared him off. I'm just really glad that he didn't try to come upstairs or anything. It still really freaked me out knowing that somebody broke in. It took me a long time to be able to fall back asleep, but eventually I was able to. That was by far my craziest Christmas experience. Nothing like that has happened since, much less on Christmas. I still don't know who the guy was though, and why he chose our house. I also don't know if the police ever found him. This happened on Christmas Eve just last year. I'm 22 and recently graduated from college. Each year on Christmas Eve, my family goes to my uncle's house for a get-together. Then on Christmas, everybody comes to our house. Last year, unfortunately for me, I had to work on Christmas Eve. I had a job at a department store in a nearby city to where we lived. It was a part-time job that I worked mostly in the summer or whenever I was back home from school. I would be getting paid extra, but would have to miss the family gathering at my uncle's. We closed slightly early at about 8 p.m. instead of the usual 10. My uncle's place was almost an hour away though, so even if I wanted to drive there right after work, it would be kind of late and I decided not to. Instead, I went back to my parents' house where I lived and was all by myself. I got back home after work at about 8:30. I remember not long after I returned home, I texted with my parents, and they were probably going to be staying at my uncle's until almost midnight. I made some food, and then relaxed and went into the living room and put on a movie. Everything was going well until about 11 at night. Out of nowhere, there were some loud bangs on the front door. It was very startling. I sat up and didn't even want to look to see who was there. The noises continued. It was like whoever was there was pounding as hard as they possibly could on the front door. After probably 10 seconds, I walked over to a window that overlooked the front door. I was upstairs and on the second floor, and when I got to the window, very carefully looked outside. I peeled back the window cover ever so slightly. When I did, I saw 3 large-looking men wearing dark-colored jackets and dark hats. I couldn't see any of their faces. They were standing around the door, and one of them was knocking on it. The bad feeling that I had became much worse. I had no idea what to do. I ran out of the room and called my parents. I told them about the situation, and my parents did not know who the men could possibly be. They said to call the police if the men didn't leave, and they told me that they would leave to come home now. Still, it would probably be 45 minutes before they got back. The knocking at the door finally stopped. I looked out the window and saw all of the men now running around to the back. This was not good. I moved towards the back of the house to try to see where the men were going. Within a minute, I heard the doorknobs to one of the back doors rattling. They were trying to get inside now. That was followed by a loud banging at the other back door that we had. I dialed 911 and tried to stay calm, even though I was completely freaking out. The men stayed near the back of the house. Then things went quiet for probably 2 or 3 minutes. I thought that maybe the men had left, but was too scared to look out of a window and see. But the silence was broken by more loud bangs, this time coming from a window. This was really bad because I didn't think the window would hold up, and they would eventually break it. Probably 30 seconds after this, I heard the sound of a car pulling into our driveway. It had to be the police. The noises from the window suddenly stopped. I decided to look out the back window now. When I did, I saw all 3 men sprinting through our backyard. They were running to the back end of it where we had a few trees, and then there was a quiet road. Very quickly, they went out of sight, and when I looked to the front and saw the police were there, I rushed out and told them about the men, and that they were running away. Unfortunately, all of the men were pretty fast, and were long gone by the time the police started looking for them. I'm not sure where they came from or where they went, but they were gone now. The police still looked around and asked me a few questions. Not long after that, my parents got home. I felt much better not being there alone anymore. After the police left, we stayed up late making sure that the guys didn't return, and luckily they didn't. That was one of the scariest experiences I've ever had. First and foremost, thank you for listening and for your continued support on the channel. It is so deeply appreciated, and I greatly enjoy connecting with every one of you. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more unnerving tales, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Which of these eerie tales gave you the creeps and chills? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. In the meantime, I want to wish you all a wonderful and safe holiday season ahead.